Welcome back to the Stat Shot Hockey Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Brown, joined by Nick Vogel. We're going to run through a little emergency podcast here as there has been a major NHL trade. Patrick Laine, along with Jack Roslovic, have been traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets in exchange for Pierre-Luc Dubois and a 2022 third-round pick. The disgruntled center wanted out of Columbus since signing a 2-year bridge deal before the season started, and he got his wish and will be moving on to Winnipeg. I'm joined by my colleague and co-host Nick Vogel. Nick, you're the CBJ fan in the room here. Your knee-jerk reaction to this big trade for the franchise?
I'm kind of ambivalent about it. The fact that we're losing a number one center, I think, is going to hurt this team in the short term and the long term. It basically took the team 15 years to find a centerman capable of carrying a line. And, with a hole like that in the lineup, we've seen how the Jackets have been, in the years that we had Rick Nash trying to win in the playoffs. It just isn't a recipe for success. But given the situation, our hand being basically forced by Pierre-Luc Dubois after watching his play over the first 4 games, I think that the return is fairly decent. I think Laine obviously is going to add scoring to a power play that's been desperate for scoring over the last 3 or 4 years. And if you look at his 5v5 scoring, it's not so much of a drop-off from Dubois. I mean, Laine's, over the last 4 years, he's had .45, .61, .59, .76 expected goals for per 60, whereas Dubois is hovering right around that .7 mark. So, what you might not get 5v5, Laine is definitely going to contribute on the power play, and then you just add in a guy like Roslovic to your bottom 6. I do think that that depth scoring is going to be big for this team. It'll be interesting to see whether it'll be at center or wing, but I'm excited to see what we have here.
Yeah, so we'll get into this and kind of analyze from all angles. From the top, though, these are the number 2 and number 3 overall picks from the 2016 NHL entry draft. Obviously, the first pick in that draft was Austin Matthews, but kind of a rare scenario where you see 2 guys from the same draft, both very close to each other, obviously one pick after the other in that NHL entry draft, and they're swapped for each other here. I'd say both players were pretty disgruntled in their situation. Dubois, obviously, to start this season, has been very unhappy and vocal about it, requesting a trade, and then kind of taken into it by the media and John Tortorella. He finishes his CBJ career with his last game being just 3 minutes of ice time against Tampa in a nationally televised game. Goes into the corner for a puck battle and doesn't really battle all that much at all, and proceeds to sit out the entire second and third period and even the overtime period in an eventual loss. And just 2 days later, he gets his wish. Saturday morning, he's granted his request and is traded to Winnipeg. But we'll start our reaction with our grade for the Jackets in this trade. Personally, from my perspective, I put this somewhere between a B+ and an A- for the Jackets. I have long been in the belief that this is a franchise that lacks elite offensive scoring. And other than Artemi Panarin, which I think he was the driver of play and the leader on that team that made the second round of the playoffs, eventually losing to the Boston Bruins. And while I think Laine will not drive play at 5v5 similar to how Panarin or even Dubois did, I think his ability to provide so little in a game but only need one opportunity to score is something that the Jackets have not had consistently since Panarin left. And I really thought Roslovic was a nice sweetener in the sense that they got him signed to a 2-year, $3.8 million contract extension, so a 1.9 AAV. And he's a hometown kid. I think he'll be here for the long term and continue to sign. And I really think they have a chance to re-up with Laine when you consider Mikko Koivu's in the room. Kekalainen at GM is another Finn who has a good relationship with Laine. So my initial reaction and grade would be a B+ for the Jackets in this trade. What about you, Nick?
Before I give the grade, it's actually something to take note of is Jarmo Kekalainen tried to trade up for the second overall pick. He wanted to select Patrick Laine in the 2016 NHL draft, and it was rumored that he actually traded up in the Gabe Carlson draft to draft Jack Roslovic, and he ended up getting scooped up earlier than expected by the Winnipeg Jets. So at the end of the day, Yarmo ended up with two guys that he scouted and had his eye on for a while. But in terms of my grade, I'd say it's a B. I don't like the idea of giving away picks. This franchise has done that the last few years. I think 2 years ago in particular, we didn't have a pick until the fourth round. And if you're a team that's having trouble getting free agents to come here, you need all of your picks to hit, and you need as many as you can. So obviously, like I said, our hand was kind of forced with the effort of Pierre-Luc Dubois, but I don't like seeing us give away draft picks, especially in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, I think it's tough to part away with that third-round pick. I know we looked at it earlier, and a couple third-round picks in recent memory that have hit for the Jackets include Oliver Bjorkstrand, Elvis Merzlikins, and going as far back as Chris Russell. And, it's kind of hit or miss when you consider later-round picks. Anything past the first or second, if you get a solid NHL player, I'd say it's a win. So tough to part ways with that pick, but I really think Roslovic, like I said, will be able to fill a good role in this Columbus lineup, and I think he'll provide value that you would get from a third rounder eventually. So we'll move from there after our grade for the Jackets into where we see these guys fitting in their lineup. And my initial reaction was they got their first line right wing, and honestly, when you pair Laine with Oliver Bjorkstrand on the right wing, I think you have two guys with elite NHL shots who can, like I said, have a really poor game but only need one opportunity to make their impact. And I would say Jack Roslovic can either be a third-line center, or if they move him to the wing, I think he could be a second-line winger, and hopefully his offensive production can improve. Where do you see it, Nick?
I think a lot's going to depend on the flexibility of the wingers. Obviously, Bjorkstrand plays the right wing. I don't know if they want to split up that scoring ability. Obviously, Bjorkstrand is a two-way guy, so I think that he could cover for some of the lapses in Laine's game. But if you think about spreading scoring throughout the lineup, it wouldn't surprise me to see them separated, especially with the fact that the Foudy, Texier, Bjorkstrand line has seen success, or even Foligno on that line. But I think that Laine is going to slot in next to Max Domi because of his playmaking ability. Getting the puck to Laine, like you said, all he needs is one chance. But I think Roslovic as the 3C is an ideal situation. When Jenner's playing C, or even a guy like Koivu, I think that they're a little bit higher in the lineup than they should be. I think it'll allow for them to slot guys down and get into more of a checking role for the fourth line.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Roslovic will come in kind of rejuvenated. And regardless of role, we talked about it before we started recording that he was kind of unhappy in Winnipeg, not only because of playing in the city, but he was tired of playing the third line role. But I think being back home, regardless of his role in the lineup, if he's in the top 9, I think Roslovic's going to be happy. Yeah,
I'd have to agree with that. And it seems like the city's kind of attached to this, coming home story. So I hope that it works out, and I hope that Torts, makes him a better player, because obviously he has some flaws in his game.
Yeah, and I think that's another takeaway, is that Tortorella can find positives from both of these guys, and there might be some bumps in the relationship, but it would be my assumption that the front office, in making this deal, had to kind of put it in Torts' ear that, hey, we just traded a star for a star. Our old star was disgruntled. We want to keep Laine happy. You don't make this trade unless you have full intention on signing Laine long-term, which we'll touch on later. But I think that had to be part of the deal. So I do think the biggest positive from this trade for the Jackets is, though, them trying to maximize the potential of this power play. And we laid it out before this, but if you want to run through what we thought that first power play unit could be with Laine added to it, be my guest, because I think it's a really exciting lineup to look at.
Yeah, you have Zach Werenski running the point, obviously the best offensive defenseman on our team, with Bjorkstrand probably on the right side because he has a tendency to use that half slap shot. I don't know exactly what you call it.
Where he curls back up to the blue line, gains a little speed, gets that pass from Werenski. I like him in that spot in the right circle, but then you put Laine in that other circle, and it becomes that much more dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Laine has a one-timer option on the power play, Obviously, they had Bemstrom there early in the season, and he wasn't connecting as well as you'd like. So, Laine, like we said, has an elite shot, probably one of the top 5 shots in the game, if not the best. And then Domi in the bumper position, a guy with skill that can make plays. And Nick Foligno in front. You need somebody to screen the goalie. Nick Foligno has nice hands for in tight. It could be a power play where we're just shooting pucks as much as we can because of just the elite shots on the wings.
Yeah, and like you said, Laine in that right circle, almost in the Ovechkin spot, where it's really something the Jackets haven't had in terms of an elite shot on a power play. Obviously, Artemi Panarin is an unbelievable playmaker and someone you would want on every power play, but I wouldn't say this is something this franchise has ever had in terms of one guy on a power play where you're almost expecting him to score on every power play.
Yeah, and going back to the Panarin thing, he was much more of a playmaker than a goal scorer. You know exactly what you're getting for, or what you're paying Laine for, and it's to use his shot, literally camp out right above the faceoff dot and rip the puck.
Yeah, and I think that's really exciting, and I think for a guy like Werenski or even Jones from the top of the circle, you have to be really excited from the thought of not only can you be feeding Laine for one-timers and Bjorkstrand to your right in that sense, but I think it really opens up spots for 2 guys in Jones and Werenski who can be really good point producers on a power play that Laine is going to draw a lot of attention from the 2 guys.
Yeah.
So it could really help out everybody in the sense that he's going to draw attention, and it forces teams to pick one side to defend. And if you're going to commit to one side, you're going to leave somebody open. And maybe that makes Bjorkstrand the beneficiary in the long run. But so we'll go to the negatives of this trade, and I think the obvious is the defensive side of the puck. Obviously, Dubois playing center is going to provide more in the defensive zone than Laine, but is that something as a Jackets fan you're willing to risk after seeing the deficiencies in this team offensively to start this season?
I don't know if I'd say I'm willing to risk it, but I'm kind of indifferent because I don't think that it would really matter. In a sense that the strength of our team, people have been saying, is up the middle, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that our centers, or when we had Dubois, the centers that we had were good enough to go far in the playoffs. And so, you know, I've mentioned to you before off the podcast that I still think this team is years away from actually competing. And so you do need elite scoring on the wings, and I think Laine is going to have the potential to do that, so it gives us time to fill those roles. But it's not something that I'm happy about because it's just going to it's not something you can get away with. You're going to have to fill it eventually.
Yeah, and whether that be through unrestricted free agency or an eventual draft pick, it could go either way. I think the ideal dream for a Jackets fan is either Alexander Texier or probably Liam Foudy developing into a center and becoming a long-term 1 or 2C, but I don't know that I see them evolving into an elite player down the middle. I think they both could be very solid players, but that has to be the dream in-house option-wise.
Yes, obviously, it'd be amazing if Texier could be a 1C, and he's shown flashes of high-level skill. I know the play that he made in Detroit with the wraparound and some of the passing that he's displayed. You see glimpses of being a top 6 player, but he still needs to be stronger on the puck, and he still is not able to carry a line on his own. So I do think he could be a 2C option one day, but again, he's not in the same realm as Pierre-Luc Dubois or guys like Bergeron.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let's finish off the Jackets portion here by talking about the long-term implications of this trade. And I know one thing that you mentioned this morning, and I think an interesting way to analyze this is the knee-jerk reaction on Twitter from a lot of people was, wow, Laine is going to be so unhappy playing with Torts. What a weird trade. Both guys wanted a bigger stage, wanted a change of scenery. Maybe they're getting more of the same. I am kind of under the assumption, and I know you mentioned this morning, Nick, I think Laine could outlast Torts in Columbus, which could ultimately make it a win for them.
I'd have to agree with that. I don't know if John Tortorella will be with the Jackets after this year. His contract is set to expire, and as far as I've heard, there haven't been any talks to extend that contract. But, the national media likes to paint this picture that Torts is a villain and he's the reason why people don't want to play here. And I'm not going to say whether I think that's the entire reason, but I do think that part of that might contribute towards people being unhappy. And at this point, Laine is worth more than Tortorella, in my opinion. The scoring that he brings, the potential to be something greater than a middling team that struggles to win in the playoffs.
I agree, and I think this could be one of the first times since Jarmo Kekalainen became GM that he really puts his foot down and says we're going to pick player over system or coach. Because I think when you look back on Panarin, Bobrovsky, things like that, the Jackets didn't really have a choice. Those guys were moving on. You made moves for them, but when they hit unrestricted free agency, they made it known that they were going. I think this is a situation where you could tell Laine, you can be the face of the franchise here. You can be our guy. And if you provide him that big money deal that he's looking for, you move on from Tortorella and you tell Laine it's your franchise, we're running with you. New head coach comes in. Maybe the whole system changes and they just become more of a riverboat gambler team, up and down. We're going to let our offensive defensemen run the play, and Laine can score 40 goals. Maybe we won't be an Eastern Conference finalist. Maybe we won't be a Cup champion, but we're going to run out there and try every night to score and be exciting. I think it's something that could really change the whole face of the franchise.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I'm actually in the process of reading Brian Burke's book, and something that he talked about is that, this is a business, right? So you need to get ticket generation. You need people to buy season tickets, up the price eventually. Laine is a guy that people will recognize across the league. Pierre-Luc Dubois, while a great player in his own right, is not a face of the NHL. If you're a 40 goal player consistently, people will know you wherever you go. And that's huge in terms of just the casual fan and the ticket revenue for the franchise. I know that they've struggled to sell tickets, and Laine is definitely someone that the name alone can put seats or can fill seats.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a long-term effect for the Jackets that after this year, if they present Laine with a 7-8 year deal, now that they have the ability to go to 8 years having his rights, this is their chance, in my opinion, to kiss goodbye the Torts era. And I think they got a lot of positives out of it. They made a lot of strides as a franchise. But this is a time where they can turn the corner and say, all right, we had our big name head coach who was able to bring us winning. Now's our time. Let's build around a franchise caliber player and become more prominent in the market, I'd say.
And I've been saying this for years, and I think you can agree with me, that Tortorella is the best for a team that is young and building a culture, establishing a culture of winning, teaching guys how to play in defensive zones. So if you think about the core that I see, as in Foudy, Bemstrom, Texier, Bjorkstrand, Jones-Werenski, they've all learned how to play away from the puck through Tortorella. They figured out ways to win even when you can't score. Now it's at the point where those guys understand what it takes, the sacrifices you have to make in the playoffs, and they can always go back to playing that way. But they have so much offensive potential that if you get a new coach, a new system, they can discover that, start scoring more, and then when times get tough or they need to lock down a team in the playoffs like the Lightning, they can go back to that Tortorella brand of hockey, the defensive intangibles, and really shut teams down. I don't think that Torts is a cup winning coach. He's not someone that you're going to go to the Cup final with, but I do think it's huge in terms of establishing the right way to play with these young players.
I think it'd be interesting to see teams like Detroit or Chicago have a guy like Torts come in where you're trying to stabilize a culture. Things may have been rocky or really, really bad in the last few years, and he's a guy who can come in and, like you said, it might not be flashy, it might not be exciting, but he can stabilize and help young players really become fixtures in this league. So I think, like we said, it's probably time for the players to start outlasting the coach in Columbus, and this might be the first step. So, we'll wrap up the Jackets talk there and move on to the Jets. Your initial grade for the Jets in getting really a first-line center who maybe gives them a 1A, 1B down the middle with Mark Scheifele.
I think it's a great deal for the Jets. I think that they have enough scoring on the wings with guys like Kyle Connor and Blake Wheeler.
Nikolai Ehlers as
Nikolai
well.
Ehlers, another Danish guy connection with Bjorkstrand. But Dubois as a 2C, I think, is an ideal situation. If you look at a cup team like Pittsburgh or the Blues, of recent memory, they always have an elite 2C as well. And Dubois could be a 1C on probably half the teams in the league, but on a great team, he's probably best suited as a 2C. I think that he'll get a little bit easier matchups, and it should really help him in terms of his offensive production.
Yeah, I agree. And I saw some people even floating there's a chance if Winnipeg wanted to load up a line, having him and Scheifele on the same line. Thinking about the idea of Scheifele centering Dubois and Wheeler, that line will beat teams up.
Yeah, it's the best. It might be the best two-way line in the game if that were to come to fruition. But again, I don't know how they're gonna shake it up because I think they will want scoring throughout the lineup. I know that their bottom six is going to be lacking, especially with the subtraction of Jack Roslovic.
Yeah, but ultimately, Laine was not re-signing. Roslovic did not have a deal and had not appeared in a game this season. I think it might have been best case scenario for them to take their chances on Dubois. And I'm not convinced he's signing there long term, but for a 2-year period with the guys they have under contract, I'd take my chances in getting an elite two-way center for two guys who were not going to sign for your team.
Yeah, and, Dubois might sign there. I know that his father is a current coach. I don't know what his actual title is, but he does work for the Winnipeg Jets, so he will have that family connection.
Yeah, and so that was my next point was ultimately Dubois' whole reason for wanting to move out of Columbus was being on a bigger stage. Is Winnipeg a big enough market for him, or do you think playing in Canada alone will make it more alluring for him to stay there long term?
Oh, that's a tough question. I definitely think playing in Canada will help, and I don't know necessarily that it is a bigger market. I don't have the stats in front of me, but in terms of just people recognizing you away from the rink and in your province, whatever, I would say yes, it is a bigger market than Columbus. You're not second fiddle to a college team, quite frankly. You are the guy in the city, and you can be a hero if you bring that franchise success.
Yeah, and I think it's always big for a Canadian team when they have not necessarily homegrown, but it'd be the same if an American team had an American as their best player. It's important for Canadians to have Canadians, as their best players. And I think having Scheifele and Dubois as your two faces of the franchise, and their two other faces of the franchise, Kyle Connor and Blake Wheeler, are both Americans. So it's kind of a balancing act, and I think it works for the Jets similarly to how it works for the Jackets. In Dubois will bring name recognition. It's a big name deal. You're bringing in a big name player, and I think he can help kind of grow that brand as well, especially if he continues to evolve into an elite center in this league.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. I mean, they've already posted pictures of him in New Jersey. He looks incredible, and it's a great situation for him. I know that Winnipeg likes to run and gun, and he's been desiring to play in a system like that. And we've seen guys in Columbus, when they leave, go on and score 20 more points than they had in Columbus. And I think he's a guy that could be a point per game there.
I think it's interesting to look at from that perspective. I know you mentioned Panarin, and obviously those two are not too comparable in terms of their style. But Panarin went from being an 87-point player in Columbus to a 95-point player in just 70 games in New York. So I think if Dubois could go from a 55 to 60-point center to a 70 to 80-point center, it's a huge win for the Jets.
I mean, yeah, you see it even with guys like William Karlsson. He played, and I think he scored 12 goals, was his career highest through the Jackets, and then he goes on and scores, 40 goals for the Vegas Knights?
Yep. So we'll finish the Jets talk with this, and I guess this doesn't really completely pertain to the Jets, but what is the lasting legacy for Pierre-Luc Dubois in Columbus? He finishes his career with 239 games played in Columbus. There are only 12 draft picks in franchise history who played over 300 games. Is Dubois' legacy just falling into that same category of star player who wanted to get out of Columbus, or what would you see as his lasting memory in Columbus?
I think that the fans here are going to view him similarly to Jeff Carter. I think he's going to be probably more hated than Jeff Carter, because you look at that 2016 NHL draft. There was a consensus top 3 players. That was Matthews, Laine, and Puljujarvi. And the Jackets shocked the hockey world, reaching, I guess you could say, on Pierre-Luc Dubois. There was a collective gasp at the draft. They had the camera pointed at Puljujarvi. And we took a risk on this kid, developed him, gave him the keys to the city, basically. And for him to do that, I think, is a slap in the face of the franchise. I'm hoping that Laine comes in, stays here, and makes everyone forget about Pierre-Luc Dubois. But as far as I know, I think that he's going to receive a lot of boos when he's on the ice here. And quite frankly, I'm going to boo him. I never booed Panarin, because at least he gave everything when he wanted to leave. Same way with Bob. But Dubois, the effort that I saw in the first 4 games was pitiful. And I think that his benching was rightfully deserved. And, in the pregame, not even the pregame, the preseason press conferences, he was saying how he didn't want it to be a distraction, how he was going to give his full effort. And he just didn't do that. I don't want to say I don't respect him, but I think a lot less of him after everything that he's done.
Yeah, and I want to go back to a point that you made there about Laine staying long-term, in your opinion, and how badly I think Columbus fans want that. Is he the guy you think that can change the narrative about stars staying in Columbus?
I definitely think that could be a step in the right direction, but I think it ultimately is going to depend on how the Jones deal goes in 2 summers. He's going to be a UFA, and we really haven't heard anything about whether he wants to stay or not. If he leaves, this franchise is going to be set back 4 to 5 years, in my opinion. He's the guy that we're going to have to keep. I think Laine, since he's an RFA, we will own his rights. He doesn't really get a say. I mean, I think he could do like a 1-year deal or 2-year deal to UFA, but I think it's going to start with Jones, and if we keep him, then yes, Laine is going to be the guy that we're going to have to keep in-house to get that narrative away from the city.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the next step for the Jackets, and we touched on it with Laine outlasting Torts, is this could be franchise-defining. And this time that they traded a star or let a star leave, they got one in return. And I don't think that's ever been part of the deal for the Jackets. Going back to even the Rick Nash trade, they've never received someone of this high caliber in return. I guess the closest would be Jeff Carter, and he just continued to do it and left. So you could even go back to Johansson. Johansson wanted out, but you get Jones in return, and I think Jones has been an unbelievable ambassador to the city. So the narrative goes for him as well. If he re-ups and stays, and Laine stays, that narrative about not wanting to play in Columbus turns significantly. And I think it even includes Werenski when he is ready to sign long-term after his bridge deal is up.
Yeah, the good news with Werenski is that he will be an RFA. I know that in 2 years it's going to be a chaotic offseason with Jones, Werenski, Jenner, Korpisalo, Merzlikins, Bemstrom, Foodie, Gabe Carlson, all needing deals. So, after that, the team could look completely different. I don't know where they're going to go with some of those guys, and even Foligno, Savard, Grigorenko, and Koivu having deals expiring this year. So, yeah, if they can keep those guys, the Jones, Werenski, Laines, I think they'll be okay, but I don't know. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough with the cap situation and the stagnant cap.
For sure. So, all right. Well, we'll wrap up the emergency pod there. We tried to cover all angles that we could in terms of the Jets, the Jackets, coaching situations. Is anything a big enough stage in the NHL? Hell, you play in the biggest league in the world. You'd think you'd be satisfied just playing in it. But we'll end off there. Be on the lookout for our next podcast coming next week with our second week in review of the NHL. Thank you guys for tuning into this emergency podcast, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.